morning, everybody. My name is Sydney Conmey. I'm the marketing coordinator for the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. Today, we are hearing from Jim Tierney from East Cambridge Savings Bank about financial literacy and resources. Today, we'll be going over a bunch of different ways on how to protect yourself and your business from fraud and scams. So thank you so much for Jim for being here, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Sharing my screen now. Can you guys see that? I have our presentation up here. Can you guys see everything?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So go ahead and get started here. So thank you again for having me. I enjoy doing these things and being able to speak with the community about, what's going on in the industry, what type of fraud is out there, especially, the past year, there's been so much. And I find it's just one of those things where it's helpful to just, get yourself out there, familiarize yourself with the resources, see what's in the news, and just stay abreast of all the information, because that's really the only way you can protect yourself. You don't know what you don't know. So if you're not, coming to things like this and listening to industry professionals talk about what's going on, you might not hear about some, new threats that are out there, and you may not be equipped to protect yourself. So the goal today is to just give you guys some information about what's out there, and, help you guys hopefully protect yourselves, your accounts, your family, your businesses. And obviously, I'm happy to help answer any questions you guys might have. And even after this presentation, I'll share my contact information. And if you guys have any questions about what's going on out there or how to protect yourself, I'm happy to be a resource. So today's discussion, some things we'll talk about are current events and trends in fraud, commonly asked questions, understanding the various types of fraud that are out there, as well as learning what the fraudsters are after. We want to be able to recognize a fraud attempt as well before it's too late. And then also you want to understand what to do if you are contacted and if you do fall victim to a scam. And then we'll also just go over some information on what you can do to protect yourself and your business. And then we'll give you guys some links to some available resources at the end of the presentation. And then I will also be forwarding some information following the presentation. And I believe that this presentation is going to be recorded as well. So just some trends in fraud that we've seen a lot of in recent years, especially this year. There's a lot of account takeover fraud, which you guys may not be familiar with that, but that's when a fraudster, gains access to your accounts by illegitimate means and is able to act on your accounts. There's a number of different ways they can get their hands on your information, whether it's through a phishing attempt or some sort of social engineering scheme. But there's ways for them to get your information and be able to take over your accounts. And oftentimes the victims themselves play a role in allowing the fraudsters access to the accounts without even knowing. So it's really important that you're able to recognize a threat and recognize when something seems a bit off so that you don't fall victim. Another thing we see a lot of is identity theft, where individuals' personal information is compromised and fraudsters are able to do a number of things with their personal information, whether it's open accounts, apply for loans, apply for credit cards, all that sort of stuff. So very, very scary, but there are things you can do to protect yourself. So it's important that we understand. There's also been an uptick in fraudulent app installs where, individuals are clicking on links and software is being installed behind the scenes without them even realizing it. So it's really, really important that you are careful about what you're clicking on, especially on your email. If you're at work and you have an employee email account, you want to make sure that you're being careful when you're clicking on things, because you're now not only compromising yourself, but you may be compromising your business. So really be careful about that. And then some, on the banking side, we do see a lot of, you hear about things like wire fraud and debit card fraud, and debit card fraud is much more common. Wire fraud there's a lot of checks and balances there, but what can happen sometimes is people think they're sending money to somebody and it's legitimate, and unfortunately it's not. And once a wire is sent, even if it's sent legitimately, if it's sent to the wrong person, there's no recourse to be able to really pull that money back. So it's really important that you understand where you're sending a wire, why you're sending it, and that you protect yourself. With wire fraud in particular, one thing that's common is when you're purchasing a house, which some of you, if you've bought a house in the past, you may have been told by the attorney that, nobody will contact you for a wire, don't send anybody a wire. They're usually very adamant about that. And that's because once it's gone, and, they want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. So just want to make sure you guys are aware of that. And then last but not least, I mentioned this already, but application and account opening fraud. This comes as a result of the fraudsters gaining access to your information, and at which point they can then open accounts and apply for loans and do things like that because they have all of the necessary information that's going to be asked. So if you can manage to protect your information first and foremost, that's going to mitigate the threat of a fraudster coming in and being able to do something. But aside from that, you also want to be aware of the red flags and have some sort of monitoring, in place to protect yourself moving forward. Because, in today's day, we talk a lot about vaccines right now, and I sort of look at fraud as, sort of the way vaccines work, where you sometimes can't protect yourself from something until you're facing it, and that's sort of how the vaccine works. And once you realize you're dealing with something, you've come up with a solution. But unfortunately, like until you are dealing with it, sometimes there's not ways to protect yourself. And if you're not familiar with the threats, you may not be protecting yourself to the best of your ability. Some frequently asked questions that we get are, who are the victims? What are fraudsters after? Why do they do it? Can you prevent fraud? And how do fraudsters get personal information? The victims can be anybody. They can be businesses. They can be individuals. They don't, they don't care, who you are or, what you're doing. They'll if they think they can get something out of you, they'll come after you. And they'll come after your personal information. They'll come after your, banking information, credit card numbers, whatever they can try and get their hands on, they will if they can use it, for bad means. So you want to make sure that you're doing what you can to protect yourself. Why they do it, it may be for personal gain. It may be a big fraud ring. And, we don't know. There's a lot of bad actors out there, and we don't always know what the motive is behind it. Sometimes it's politically motivated, sometimes it's just an individual, sometimes it's nation states going after other countries, and you have fraud coming from there's whether it's out in North Korea or wherever these countries are where there's a lot of fraud coming over. You want to make sure you're protecting yourself, and it's very important that you do that. And then finally, how do the fraudsters get the personal information? Well, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the times the victims themselves play a role in giving them the information. I said the word phishing earlier, and we'll get into that a little more as we go on. But what that is basically the fraudsters are phishing for information. So they'll try and use various tactics to ask questions and, see if they can pull a little bit of information out of you at a time. And it's sort of like they're putting together a puzzle. They'll ask different questions. They'll use different ways of getting different information. They'll approach it from different angles. And then finally, they have kind of all the information they need because they've done all these tactics. So they're very, very sophisticated. And as technology is advanced, they've found different ways to, to get their hands on our information. So it's really, really, really important that you kind of stay on top of it. And most importantly, are able to just recognize, when there's a red flag and go with your gut. A lot of times when something seems off, a lot of times it is. So it's very important that you, that you go with your gut in a lot of these cases. As I said, fraud attempts can come in many forms, whether it's in person or they call you on the phone, email, text, or even through the mail. I'm going to go through some real life scenarios toward the end of the presentation. And, some of it's really sad, how it happens, but it's, they'll go through any channel they can if they think it'll allow them access to your information. And a lot of times they'll do it in ways that you may not be suspecting. So you might not be suspecting to, get fraud through the mail, but you might, or you might not be expecting to get a fraudulent phone call from National Grid. You might think it's actually National Grid on the phone, but in reality it's not. And a lot of people have accounts with National Grid. So why would you second guess that? It's things like that. And they're very creative. And, hopefully as we go through this presentation, you guys will sort of have some light bulbs go off and be like, oh, wow, that's a good idea. Oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that. And that's really that's the goal of this, is just to make everybody sort of think, how they can protect themselves and make them aware of what's out there. There's a number of fraud scenarios that we see, whether it's banking scams, debt collection scams, Social Security fraud, mail fraud, real estate fraud, and elderly scams. Just to touch on some of these, for example, Social Security fraud. What happens a lot of times is individuals get calls and they'll say, we're going to stop your Social Security payment. There's been an issue. We need to confirm your information so that your payment can go through. Obviously, individuals want to make sure they're getting their monthly income, and they get they get scared and they give the information away. And then now the fraudster has their information. they have no idea it's not actually someone from Social Security. And, now they go and do, whatever they want to do with that information. So it can be scary. And that's why if people aren't aware that these things are happening, they don't know how to protect themselves. And one thing I always say is the IRS will never call you. Social Security is never going to call you on the phone and talk to you. It's not going to happen. So if someone calls and says they're from the Social Security office, it's more than likely it's not a legitimate phone call. So you really want to make sure you're protecting yourself there. Another one is the elderly scams. This one in particular is very sad, and it happens often. They'll target elderly people, and they'll do things like, they'll say so-and-so was in a car accident, and, you need to send money to help them, and blah, blah, blah. Or, they'll pretend to be grandkids, and they'll say, can you send us some gift cards? And people do it. And unfortunately, they take advantage of the elderly. And that happens, it happens a lot. And it's important that, when you get these phone calls, or if you get an email, that you really make sure it's from a legitimate source, and you don't just do what they say, and you ask questions, and give a little pushback, because there's a number of ways that they can try and, get creative and try and get their hands on your information. And it's really important that you protect yourself. So as I said earlier, the fraudsters will target individual consumers. They'll target businesses of all shapes and sizes. Like I said, if they think they can get their hands on their information, it doesn't matter if it's a bigger organization. Sometimes they may think if it's a larger organization, it may be easier to slip through the cracks. Maybe they think it's a smaller organization. Maybe the person's paying closer attention, and they're not going to have a harder time. So they don't care. They're going to take their chances. They're going to shoot their shot. And that's why it's important for you to just assume that, yeah, you could be a victim at any time, and you want to make sure that, you're doing what you can to protect yourself at all times, because fraud never sleeps, unfortunately. So the fraudsters, typically what they're after is the non-public private information, stuff that's not easily available. They will use whatever public information is available to try and get in touch with you or get a hold of you. And then they want to get a hold of that non-public information, like your Social Security number, so that, they can apply for, fraudulent accounts and fraudulent loans and all of that. They also want to get a handle on your account information so they can access your money, whether it's to send a fraudulent transfer out to another bank, or to try and, generate a fake debit card so that they can access the money that way. It's unfortunate. They also go after proprietary business information and financial data. So that happens, pretty often. And that's why, as I said earlier, if you do have, if you're working for a company and you have company email, you'll see sometimes you get external emails that come through from outside of wherever you work. You want to be careful of whatever links are included, because sometimes fraudsters will send an email and they'll embed something in the body of the email, so that if you click on it, it may compromise your company's network, may allow access to sensitive information. And our IT team, here at East Cambridge Savings Bank, they're always sending out information on phishing attempts, always keeping us up to date on, what threats are out there, so that we can protect ourselves, the company, as well as share information with our customers to keep them safe, because there's just a lot of threats out there. So how do fraudsters get the private information? You want to make sure you keep their tricks in mind. One thing they do when they have you on the phone is they try and rush you into making a decision as to what it is they're calling you about, or emailing you, whatever it is. They try and rush you and put pressure on you. They try and trick you into paying them by thinking you've done previous business with them. They may pick a company that, a lot of people shop at, or a website a lot of people shop with, because the chances are you maybe have done business with them, and so leads you to believe it is a legitimate interaction when it isn't. And also, scammers can change caller ID to make it look like it's coming from a local area code. That's another common practice. So you may answer the phone because you see a 617 number, but in reality, they're not calling from here. So it's important that you're able to pick up on the red flags when you're having the conversation to, identify, even though it looks like a local number, this person doesn't sound like they're actually calling from this, place of business. Another thing they'll do is they'll make a lot of vague claims, but they won't be able to give any real specific information. And that's why it's important to be able to push back and ask questions, because that's where you may be able to pick up on the red flags, where, for example, if they're calling you about your Apple computer and they're telling you that you need to let them give access so that they can help you fix the issue you have. If you tell them, well, I'll just take it to the Apple store, and they say, no, you don't want to do that. Well, that might be a red flag, because obviously a store like Apple would be able to help, with whatever issue you're having with the product. And again, it's not often that they're proactively calling you to say, hey, there's an issue with your computer, we should help you with that. So things like that, it's just, to some people may seem like common sense, but to some people, my own mother fell victim to a scam similar to that. And I actually happened to walk into the house, while she was on the phone with someone, and I grabbed the phone and I started talking to them and immediately hung up the phone, restarted the computer, and luckily she wasn't compromised yet, but it literally can happen to anybody. So it's very important that, that you're aware of what's out there. So we'll talk a little bit more about phishing scams now, because this is just a very, very, very common practice. In the past few months, I mentioned National Grid because I personally have actually gotten 7 or 8 phone calls from someone pretending to be National Grid, saying there's an issue with the bill, saying they're going to like shut off power, and again, it all goes back to creating a sense of urgency, making someone feel nervous so that they can get what they want. And sure enough, I called National Grid and they're like, yeah, no, that wasn't us. Your account's fine. And so just be careful when you're getting phone calls, make sure that the actual origin of the call. And then phishing emails and text messages, as I said before, they'll often tell you to click on a link, and you want to make sure that you're being careful and you're not clicking on something just because someone says to, because if you click on a link before you realize it's a fraud attempt, it may be too late. Some things they do, so they may say they've noticed some suspicious activity in your accounts. They may claim there's a problem. They may say they need to confirm some personal information. They may send you a fake invoice, ask for a payment, say you're eligible for a refund, anything. It might be anything. There's, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And oftentimes it's a fraud attempt. So just be careful of what they try and say and what they do, to try and get your information. A little bit more on phishing. As I said, scammers will use email or text messages to trick you into giving them your personal information. They may try and steal your passwords, your account number, social security number, and if they get that info, they could gain access to your email, bank, or other accounts. Scammers launch thousands of phishing attacks like these every day, and they're often successful. Consumers fall victim to millions of dollars in fraud every year. Scammers often update their tactics, but there are some signs that will help you recognize a phishing email or a text message. I've already sort of gone over what they do, so that you can be familiar with that. But phishing emails and text messages, as I said, may look like they're from a company you know or trust. They may look like they're from a bank, a credit card company, social networking site, whatever it is. One thing that's really important when if you are getting an email, if you hover your mouse over the email address that it's coming from, it'll show you more than just the person's name, and you can actually see the link or the URL like for their email, and see if it's actually, John Smith at, target.com, or if it's John Smith at, xyz123.com and it's a fake email. Oftentimes they'll make the emails look legitimate, but they're not. We've actually gotten, as bank employees, there's emails that come through all the time, from people trying to, get fraudulent information. They pretend to be your CEO or they pretend to be the CFO, and they say, hey, I need this wire sent right now. Please send, and it's things like that. No one calls you and says, hey, you have to do this right now. That's not how it works usually. And when a fraudster does that, again, they're trying to create a sense of urgency. They're trying to make you nervous. They're trying to put you under pressure. And they don't, they want to make you make an ill-informed decision. So just make sure you don't allow yourself to be rushed. Don't click on anything if it seems suspicious. Read the entirety of any message that you are being sent and understand who it's being sent from. And just make sure you're not just clicking on anything, willy-nilly, because that can put you in some hot water. Recently, there's been some fraud in 2021, sort of unique to the pandemic that we're dealing with, and I thought it would be important to bring up these. I'm sure some of them you may already be familiar with, the unemployment fraud I'm sure you heard about, as well as some of the COVID payment fraud. But some other things that I've seen that you may not be as familiar with is contact tracing fraud, as well as donation fraud. So we'll talk through those, as they're pretty prevalent in the industry right now, unfortunately, just given what we're dealing with. First and foremost, so contact tracing fraud. You want to learn how to tell the difference between a real contact tracer and a scammer. Legitimate tracers need health information, not money or personal information. Contact tracers are the folks who work with the state health departments to try and track anyone who may have been exposed to COVID-19. They're an important part of our road to recovery, but there's some scammers that are pretending to be contact tracers so they can profit off of the confusion. Scammers will ask you to do more than what's required. As I said, they don't need your financial information or anything like that. They don't need you to pay them. So, don't pay a contact tracer. Anyone who says you need to pay is a scammer, plain and simple. Don't give your social security number or financial information. There's no reason for a legit contact tracer to need that. Don't give your credit card number either. As I said, even if you've got a restaurant or something and they say, oh, I want to confirm something from your bill. No, there's no need to do that. So make sure you're not giving them that information. Don't share your immigration status. Legit contact tracers don't need to know that and won't ask for it. So if they do, that should be a red flag. And don't click on links or download anything sent to you from alleged contact tracers. Real tracers will only send you texts or emails that say they'll be calling you. So they'll usually call you on the phone. They won't send you something saying to click or download a link. So just please be aware of that. I'm sure a lot of us might be going out to restaurants once in a while, and sometimes they're taking down the names and numbers. And so, like I said, they may call you, but if you're getting an email or a text, chances are it's fraudulent, and just make sure you're aware of what signs to look for. In terms of unemployment fraud, fraudsters use different individuals' information to apply for fraudulent unemployment benefits. Fraud cases have spiked all over the country. When at the onset, there was the state of Washington, had a ton of fraud in their unemployment office. And since then, it's all over the country. And now what banks have to do is monitor as these claims are coming in, before they're able to pay them and make sure the individual getting the money, they're checking to make sure that they're not fraudulent and that the names actually match up, because a lot of what was happening is individuals were getting payments, not in their names. And the bank has to be able to tell if this is a legitimate transaction or not. And so just make sure you're, reviewing your accounts. And if you do get notice that you were a victim of unemployment fraud, it's very important that you go and, close the account that was involved, open a new one. You don't want to take a chance if any of your information is floating around out there. You don't want to, have it in the hands of the wrong person. So it's best to just close the account, open up a new one, get yourself a new check, new checks, new debit cards, all of that. Because you just don't want to take a chance of having that floating around out there. Next is COVID payment fraud. You don't want to respond to texts or emails or calls about checks from the government or the stimulus payments. Again, the IRS isn't going to call you. The Treasury isn't going to call you. If you do get a call from someone claiming they have, a stimulus payment for you or something like that, the chances are they're just trying to rip you off. There's some tips for avoiding, the coronavirus stimulus payment plan. You can go to irs.gov/coronavirus, submit your information to the IRS, but never respond to a call or text or email. The IRS won't contact you by phone, as I already said. You don't have to pay to get your stimulus money. So if someone calls you and says, we have this money, it's ready to go, but there's a delay, we need you to send us X amount and then we can get you the money today. No, that's not how it works. So please don't fall victim to that. Again, the IRS is never going to call you. They're not going to cut a deal with you to get you your money faster. It's going to come when it comes. And if someone calls you saying they have your stimulus check for you, it's fraudulent. Next, there's donation fraud. And sadly, whenever there's challenging times and people, struggling, there's always going to be fraudsters that come out and try and take advantage of that. And try and take advantage in the form of soliciting donations to fraudulent charities. So it's very important that you do your homework when it comes to making donations and charities. Understand the organization that you're giving to. You don't necessarily have to have a history with the organization, but it's important to look at reviews, look at what kind of work the organization is doing. Are they having an impact in the community? Can you see what they're doing? Is it tangible? So you can get an understanding as to what your money is going to be going toward, and that it is a legitimate charity. Because it's very easy to make a fraudulent website and put up some pictures, or create a Facebook page or an Instagram page and say you're a charity, and then if you don't, if you're not careful when you're making your donations, you could fall victim and the money's not going where you think it's going to go. So when you decide to support a cause you care about, you want your donation to count. Doing some research and planning your giving can help ensure your donations get where they'll do good. So do some research online. If you're looking for a charity to support, search for a cause you care about. You can go on Google and type in hurricane relief, homeless kids, best charity, highly rated charity, anything like that. And I'm sure a list will come up, but do your research, look at the reviews, read if there's any complaints, read into the donation processing, understand how much is actually getting through to the charity that you're donating to. But it's very, very important that you do your research. So oftentimes you hear the term buyer beware. And in this case, I would say, donor beware, because there's a lot of fraud out there, unfortunately. So also you want to be careful how you pay. So donate wisely. If someone wants donations in cash or by gift card or by wiring money, don't do it. That's how scammers ask you to pay. You want to pay by credit card or check if possible. And, you don't want to give that information to a scammer, obviously, but if a scammer calls you and asks you to send them a donation via gift card or by wiring money, that should just be a red flag that it's a scammer, because typically institutions aren't going to ask for it that way. You may have a relationship with someone and you can send them a wire via, for a donation, but they're not going to, upfront request it or call you for that. And it's a good best practice to keep a record of all donations as well. You want to review your statements closely, make sure you're only charged the amount that you agreed to donate, keep all receipts, and make sure that you aren't overcharged for something. If you do agree to a certain amount, that you aren't all of a sudden charged for a larger amount. So make sure that you stay on top of that. And then before clicking on a link to donate online, make sure you know who is receiving your donation. As I already said, it's very, very important. It's very easy to set up a fake website or whatever it is. All it takes is a link and someone clicks on it and your money's gone and now you don't know where it's going. So really, really make sure you do your research and your due diligence so that you can protect yourself and your money. I just want to touch base briefly on some real life stories that I've dealt with just in my life, just being on the retail banking side. So one story that I have is it was a bail scam, and a woman, a grandmother, actually got a call saying that her grandson was in jail and that they needed to send bail money to get him out. And this woman actually went and put cash in an envelope and put it in the mail. And we had to go to the post office and physically, we got the envelope out of the mail. So luckily we were able to catch it in time and stop it from going out. The woman came in, she got $5,000 cash. At the time that, this is, the banker thought nothing of it, just a normal transaction, just getting cash, maybe for a bill, whatever it may be. But then, a couple hours later, the woman came back and went to take out another $5,000 cash. And this is where the banker sort of realized, this seems like it's outside the normal pattern of activity for this, elderly customer, and started asking some questions. And that's where the individual found out that the woman's grandson was allegedly, arrested and needed bail money. And that's why she was sending them the cash. And she said she was sending it in the mail. And that's when immediately they went over and they went to the post office that she had just dropped it off at, and they were able to stop the batch before it was, going out, and they were able to get the envelope out, and they got her the cash back. And it's just, luckily, that's just one example. We were able to save the customer their money because, the banker knew the relationship, and the banker was able to, see the red flag, even though the customer didn't. But, it was a good situation that they were able to protect the customer. There's a Cash App puppy scam recently that unfortunately somebody sent another individual money via the Cash App, claiming it was for a puppy. They never sent the puppy, and this person was out $1,000. And unfortunately, with things like that, once you send your money to an individual and you make that agreement and you send them the money, there's really not a lot of recourse when you get scammed like that. So it's unfortunate, but it's really, really important that you really understand who you're paying, what's the organization, are they legitimate, and just really do your research. And then lastly, this one, really, it hits home. It was an auto debit scam. This individual somehow, his information was compromised, and someone was setting up a small $200 a month deduction from his checking account. And this individual carried a relatively high balance in his account, so he wasn't necessarily balancing his checkbook to the T. After about 3 years, he realized, something seemed off. He was missing a few $1,000s, and he didn't know what was going on. And sure enough, he came in. He was speaking with the team, and realized upon looking at his statements that he had been having money taken out that he didn't know about for over 2 years. And because it had been 2 years, there wasn't anything that we could do to help get his money back, because unfortunately, when it comes to disputing things, you can only go back 60 days. When someone, has like a debit card fraud situation, you have 60 days to report it. So where this was going on for over, 2 or 3 years, there was no recourse. And unfortunately, this gentleman wasn't looking at his account statements monthly, which is another thing I always tell our clients to do is please, please, please make sure you're looking at your accounts, even if it's just once a month. Just do a quick run through, make sure there's nothing going out that you don't recognize. You may even find that you're paying for some things that you forgot you were paying for, whether it's a Planet Fitness membership or, a Netflix thing or Hulu or whatever it might be, some streaming service. Looking at your accounts at least once a month can be really helpful, not just in saving you money, but also from protecting yourself. Because if it goes on for too long, sometimes there's not much recourse that you'll have in terms of getting your money back. So just some information on how you can protect yourself. There's various security softwares that are out there. There's ways you can protect yourself by using things like multi-factor authentication. You can protect your data by backing it up. All of that is very, very important because you want to try and mitigate the risk of a threat. And then also, if you were to fall victim to a threat, you want to have some sort of recourse for, having things backed up. So that's all very, very important. The multi-factor authentication is very important too, because it's going to, the fraudster might be able to get through one channel, but if you have multi-factor authentication set up, that may stop them from being able to actually get through and cause any damage. Doing things like, requiring a phone call or an additional email or a text message, after you put in your password, or security code, things like that can be really helpful. And making them complex as well, making your passwords complex, making them longer, adding special characters or symbols. It may make it harder to remember, obviously, but it's going to be harder to crack as well if you're a fraudster. So very important that you take those little steps to protect yourself as well. What to do if you do suspect a phishing attack. If you get an email or text message that asks you to click on a link or open the attachment, answer to this question is no, do not click on the link. Do I have an account with the company, or do I know the person that contacted me? That should be the first thing you're asking yourself. You may have a relationship with the company, but the next question you would have is now, why are they contacting me? Is this legitimate? And I always say, when I've been contacted by, individuals that are, trying to perpetrate fraud, I always say, so sorry, now's not a good time, but I'll call right back. And then I'll call the company myself and try and figure it out. But these fraudsters, as I said, they'll try and reach out to you, and they'll be vague. They won't be specific. And the minute you say you're going to call a company yourself, they try and say, no, that's not going to help. And, as I said, that makes no sense. And that should be a red flag for you. You can always go to the company or the organization, for the solution. If they're saying that they're not going to be able to help, then chances are they're a fraudster who have no association with the organization. What to do if you're contacted or if you respond to a phishing email. If you think a scammer has your information, like your social security number, credit card, or bank account number, you can go to identitytheft.gov. There you'll see specific steps to take based on the information that you lost. If you think you clicked on a link or opened an attachment that downloaded harmful software, you want to update your computer's security software and then run a security scan to make sure there's nothing going on behind the scenes. How to report phishing. There's a number of ways, but if you get a phishing email or text message, you want to report it. The information can help fight the scammers, whether it's reporting it to your bank, local law enforcement. It may not seem like there's much they can do. However, if there's a trend or an uptick in a particular area, if you report it to the police, for example, they'll be able to open up a case and at least keep track of, if there's an uptick or, similar fraud happening in a particular area. So it's important that you do communicate the information when it happens. Don't feel embarrassed. It happens, and it happens to a lot of people. We want to try and make sure you're protected. But if you do fall victim, it's better that you let the authorities know, let the bank know, so that they can make sure you're protected going forward. You don't want to just ignore it. Some additional steps to protect yourself. As I said, you want to stay abreast of current trends in fraud. You can set up email and text alerts for all of your accounts. You can place a credit freeze, stay in contact with your bank, understand how they can protect your accounts, use available bank resources and digital technology to monitor your accounts and control access, and always review your monthly account statements. Some things as well that I like to tell my people, like for example, here at East Cambridge Savings Bank, we have things like Card Valet, which will allow an individual to freeze access to their debit card if they think there's fraud. You can set up text alerts, so if a transaction over a certain amount comes out of your account, you'll be sent a text or an email. And those are the things that if you put in the effort up front to set up alerts like that on your accounts, you'll be notified if something comes out that's out of the ordinary, as opposed to not knowing and having to rely on just checking your account monthly or weekly or whatever it is. I would still recommend checking your account, monthly, even if you do have alerts set up. But it's, anything can happen, and it's important that you are always, always, always looking at your accounts, checking your bank statements, and really making sure that, you're doing what you can to protect yourself, because the fraudsters are always out there and they don't discriminate. They'll come after anybody. And there's a lot of threats out there. Some links here to some available resources. The ftc.gov is where you can go to make a complaint. And then you can also sign up for consumer alerts about the latest trends in fraud and the latest scams that are going on. And as I said, that's the one thing you can do to protect yourself, is just expose yourself to the information, ask questions, do research, because it's scary. Identity theft is a scary thing. It can cause a lot of headaches. And what they can do with your personal information is, it can be scary. So you really want to make sure you do what you can to protect yourself. So at this time, I'll open it up for questions. Any questions anybody has? I hope you guys found the information to be helpful. And if you guys have any questions at this time, Sydney, I don't know if you want to open it up. You guys can feel free to ask any questions you might have.
If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Our first question is from Georgie Marks. I was wondering if I have a mortgage with your bank, do I need to buy title insurance to protect my home?
That's on a case-by-case basis. So depending on what your situation is, that it may be required, but it's not just a standard requirement for all loans.
The next message is about the same topic. I'm asking about the ads we see and hear about to protect your home title from being stolen.
Yes, so that the letters you get, those are some legitimate requests, things that you can set up, but it's oftentimes vendors that are just trying to get you to pay for something that you don't necessarily need. So that's why it's important to understand and work with whether it's your mortgage broker or your local bank, understand if you need it before you do it, because a lot of times they'll charge you a fee for setting that up. They'll help you do it and get it set up for you, but they'll charge you a fee. So it's something that you may not need. And yes, it may, protect you, but it may be protecting you from a threat that you don't necessarily need to worry about. So it just, those, they make them look very official. They come in like a yellow envelope with like red writing sometimes, and it's like urgent action required. But it's not something that's required. And I would definitely just check with your, your mortgage holder and just confirm with them if it's something that they think you need. But chances are, if your lender is not reaching out to you about that, it's probably just a third party trying to solicit you for, to pay for something that you don't need.
Bill T says, suggest password manager programs and not reusing passwords across accounts.
Yes, so that's a great point. So if a lot of times people use the same password for, all different systems, and that can be dangerous, because if, if you use the same password for everything or same username for everything, and then it gets compromised, they're going to be able to access all your accounts. So definitely try and switch it up. And don't use the same password across all accounts. Use special symbols, numbers, uppercase, lowercase characters, things like that. Use security questions if possible, things that you may only know the answer to, so that if that multi-factor authentication we talked about, you want to make sure that when someone tries to access your information, they're not able to do that. That's a great point. there's actually there was some software out there, I believe it's called Secret Server. And it's a system that you can go in and you can plug in all of your usernames and your passwords along with the links to the various, systems or sites that they allow you access to. And you can actually log into the website, the Secret Server website, and click on, from within there, and it'll bring you securely into whatever site you are going to without having to remember all of your passwords. So there's also programs like that out there. So it sort of securely houses all your information, and then you just have to remember that one password to get into the, to that site, and then it can access all your information. So that's one thing if you struggle with remembering passwords. I know I do, and they all change at the same time, or they all change at different times, and they all have different requirements. So it can be tough, but it's worth it to make sure you're protected for sure.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Well, I appreciate everybody, being on the call. And as I said, the biggest thing, especially like if you're a small business owner or you work for yourself, I'm sure that's your livelihood, and you want to make sure that you protect yourself. And so the biggest threat I see dealing with the small businesses that I deal with on a daily basis is, these phone calls that are coming through and these emails that are coming through. Make sure you're looking at the email address, make sure it's legit. Do not click any links before you know that it's a legitimate link. And don't feel pressured. Don't allow yourself to feel rushed by someone who's on the phone trying to get you to do something. Just make sure that you try and keep yourself aware of what those red flags are, and just, take a deep breath, because they oftentimes can get you worked up, and it's just because they're trying to keep you distracted while they try and get a hold of your information. So just really, really make sure you're doing what you can to protect yourself, and use your resources. If you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer your questions or speak with you guys further. Aside of what I do here at the bank, I also run an organization for community reinvestment, and one of the things I focus on is helping people with financial literacy. So it's something I'm passionate about. I enjoy doing it. So if any of you have questions after this, I'll make sure that you guys all have my contact, and I'm happy to help you guys in whatever way I can.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim and East Cambridge Savings Bank, for this presentation for today. We are going to post this video and share the presentation with all of our participants on the Cambridge website and through a thank you email. So thank you so much for everybody for joining today, and we hope you have a good one.
Thank you so much, Sydney.
You're welcome.
Have a good day, everybody.